All right, next up, we have a panel of investors, and Jessi Hempel is right there, my friend, and inspires me all the time. Come on up here, Jessi, who's going to moderate this great panel with Howard's up again, Alex from TechStars, and hello, and Liza from StarVest. Liza or Lisa? Yes, they're right there. How are you? Good.
All right.
There's one, and Howard's there, and we're waiting for one more coming over here. How are you?
Hey, Alex, and we're waiting for Liza. Hey, Liza.
Hi, Liza. Come on up.
All right.
Jessi, take it away.
Okay, thank you very
Towards
much,
the end,
Evan.
a couple questions if the audience
You know
wants
what? I
it.
want you here. You guys get to watch a little musical chairs in action. So I understand that we are the piece of programming between you and beer, so we will try to be really efficient and use your time well. I'm Jessi Hempel. I'm a senior writer at Wired and a big fan of Evan. And I'm here with a panel of folks to discuss a topic which I'm sure is going to be a surprise to all of you, visual technology investing opportunities. It's kind of what the day is about. I could introduce our panel, but I'm actually going to let them each introduce themselves because I'd like you each to also give a couple of lines about the institutions you represent. I know we've got a late stage, an early stage, and an incubator guy. Alex, let's start with you.
I'm an accelerator guy.
Dude,
So real quick, I'm Alex Iskold. I'm managing director here at TechStars in New York. TechStars is I think a world-class accelerator. We help early-stage companies go faster by surrounding them with incredible mentors and helping them figure out the business and secure capital.
Thanks.
Howard Morgan, first round capital, early-stage ventures, and we try to help them grow, as we talked before.
StarVest Partners. We are an expansion stage venture fund focused on primarily B2B SaaS and technology-enabled business services. And typically we invest in companies with north of between 2 and 20 million of revenue.
Got it. So we've kind of got the whole gamut represented on our stage. So I want to start big, and I want to start by framing this according to something that Evan has spoken and written quite a bit about, this idea of the Internet of Eyes. This idea of the advancement of the Internet of Things into a sort of a visual representation, the idea that all of the objects around us could be watching us, and that unlocks opportunities, and also terrifies me. Let's talk about what those opportunities could be. Let's imagine a little bit.
Well, I mean, obviously, if it knows what I'm doing, that I've just woken up, it can take actions. It can see that I actually got out of bed, or I didn't, in which case it has to wake me up again. And sort of go from there to trying to understand my intent for things, if I'm willing to let it watch me all day. And for me, I'd like to be able to say no for a while, turn it off. Close your eyes, close your Internet of Eyes for a little while, and believe that it's actually closed. For a while, but from in the home, there are lots of interesting things. Obviously, we've already invested in things that are doing that in shopping, in stores, and so on. And the same thing is going to be true in factories.
So this idea that cameras are infiltrating our lives, are creeping into objects around us, it's been ongoing for a while. So let's talk about the specific opportunities that 2016 unlocks. I've had a camera in my iPhone for a while. What's new? And maybe I'll jump to Alex because you're seeing a lot of what's new in the companies that come to you.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. I have no idea, but I think there's like in my head, this falls into like separate categories. There's sensors, there's things that detect moving objects, there's things that have cognition and recognize things, and then there's algorithms that actually act on the information that sensors capture. And so like I would bucket them all in slightly different categories and then kind of like reassemble into like, hey, how is this helpful? So let me start kind of like with an idea of, like, let's say if you have applications for people who are visually impaired, right? Like, could we build something that is a camera in front of someone's door that would take pictures and actually would recognize family members and caregivers and other people that come in and would tell you, like, who is there. Like, to me, that's like a super interesting and pragmatic application, way more useful than something is following me and like trying to be helpful where like I don't need its help.
For sure. But I guess my question is, are you seeing those kinds of companies right now?
I'm not like running the IoT program Jenny Fielding does. Like, I do see some of these. So like the areas that I've been focused on, for example, is more of like frontier tech. So like satellites taking pictures and then, we're running some sort of computation. My focus is mostly on like, not necessarily the sensors, but like, what do you do after you capture the data?
Right. How much, when we're talking about sort of visual technology, how much is visual technology so integrated into talking about technology that it's maybe not necessarily as useful to even put the framework visual on it? And how much is unique to adding cameras to things?
I think that visual technology enables you to go into the real world so that you're not only dealing with, online. I mean, in our fund, we've invested in some things that are looking at in-store analytics because most shopping, 80% of retail still happens in stores. So that's a really important thing that visual technology enables us to do that is separate from, e-commerce technologies or something of that sort.
So tell us a little bit more about that, because you were talking about a company, is it Retail Next?
Yes.
That you guys, so tell us a little bit about that company.
So what they're doing is using visual technology in stores to actually create the same sort of analytics that you'll see online, in a store. So how do people dwell? How do people, navigate around a store? All those things are, done via cameras. And it's, some very interesting insights for large retailers out there.
And so where are retailers on the spectrum of their capability of using it? Is this R&D at this point? Are they actually deploying it?
No, actually deploying it, but I think, absolutely nascent in terms of penetration amongst retail stores to have this type of technology everywhere.
And what is it going to take for it to be deployed more widely? Is this a question of consumer
time,
comfort?
money? I think it's just a matter of time.
Got it. Howard.
Well, we're one of our companies which does software for drones, and the cameras involved is doing inspections of power lines. And one of the things, there are lots of sensors on power lines, but if you want to see if an insulator is broken and you fly the drone by and you have a camera, you can see, gee, that insulator looks a little bit off, then you can zoom in and you can fly around. You can do all sorts of things visually in inspecting things in out-of-the-way places that are much harder to do, and that sensors alone, non-visual sensors alone, just don't give you enough information.
Fair enough. And the name of that company?
Airware.
Airware. Cool.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned another company when we were talking earlier. Is it Nanotronics?
Nanotronics, yeah. We talked earlier about Nanotronics, which is able to take very high-resolution images, super high resolution, down at the sort of almost the kind of things you get from electron microscopes, but do it in an optical methodology, and then put it in real time on wafer lines, for example, and later on other areas that you want to have very high resolution, because the defects that they're trying to find visually are way too small for the naked eye to see, or way too small for normal cameras to see. But again, visual technology is advancing dramatically.
And so where are those companies in their lifespan right now? I mean...
Airware's a few years old, has raised a lot of money with us, at Kleiner Perkins and others, and is selling. I mean, Nanotronics is actually, I think, close to break even, and is installed in a lot of companies already. So they're pretty far along.
Pretty far along. So as you are investors out there looking, what is the flag that tells you that something has promise in this area, that you might be interested in investing in it?
Just following up what Howard said, there's a company that just graduated, TechStars Boulder, that's applying drones to building inspection, and it's paired sort of like it's human smarts and software and drones all acting together, because it's like super dangerous to go up those buildings. Now, so going back to your question, in my mind, this is a phenomenal application of like drones and like vision. It's sort of like solving very obvious like real life problem. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily a $1 billion company, but it's certainly solving a real problem and improving people's lives, potentially saving people's lives. So when I look at like these tech, so I think the challenge is like some of the stuff is very far out there, like if it's a research project. So when we look at the companies, like, can we help accelerate them now? Is it an investable business? I'm sure, investors at different stages kind of looking at the tech through different lens, right? Like, what's the maturity of this tech? So I think it's a like interesting question.
I mean, I think it's like anything else. It's sort of its efficiency and, doing things that were either too expensive or too difficult to do before. Some of the things that you were mentioning in terms of, examining power lines. How could you possibly send a guy up on every pole to look at all these power lines? I mean, it's essentially economically impossible. So I think that's probably, we don't invest in drones. I wish we did. It'd be very exciting. But,
very exciting.
I think from an investor standpoint, it's completely disruptive to the current way of doing things.
Fair enough. So what would you like to see improve so that some of this technology gets even better?
I don't know. Like, I'm actually like, I was thinking about the company that does sort of semantic object recognition and boundary detection, and the application that I see immediately is in augmented reality. Because if you were to build any kind of augmented reality, you actually need very precise way to identify where you are in like navigation. Like, so I think that is an example of something that's in the lab right now. But me as an investor and a business person, like, I actually see sort of like relevant application and related vertical that maybe researchers don't necessarily see. So I think there's an advantage in like these kind of forums and like mixing us together.
Two things. One, I'm sort of old school, better, faster, cheaper. That's kind of the usual mantra in technology investing.
Sure.
But also, particularly when we're talking about vision, we mostly think about human vision. But a lot of what's happening in agricultural inspection and in medical is outside the visual space. It's near infrared, it's ultraviolet, it's X-ray. So, sort of expanding vision. And those sensors are just getting to the point where they're cheap enough to be using. Visual sensors, because of camera phones, are almost free. You
right.
Put cameras everywhere. But if you want near infrared, or if you want ultra, or you want X-ray, those are still pretty expensive, and we need to move those along.
And what could those, were the cost to come down on those, Howard, what could they begin to unlock?
Well, that's why we have entrepreneurs to dream up.
That's your job, guys.
Those things, but I mean, think about X-ray technologies. If you had X-ray, so there are a lot of military uses, right? You want to see in the buildings where the terrorists are. You want to see where the bombs are that are hidden in the walls, and it's that stuff like that. For one, in medical, also seeing all sorts of. We heard about MD.AI looking at radiological images. Well, right now you have to go through an MRI. That's a pretty painful, or at least uncomfortable thing. Why can't we get visual inspection of the human body the way we're doing visual inspection of other things without the same level? So I think a lot of things could be interesting.
Fair enough. So I want to go back to what Alex said about AR. It struck me when Bijan was on stage just a little bit earlier. He said, I want to like AR. And he also spoke about 2D, 3D, 360 images as being sort of a Band-Aid fix until we got to VR and AR. And I'm curious what each of your perspectives are on the future, the immediate and the far-out future on these technologies.
I mean, I like both AR and VR in the sense that, like, I see them as, like, fascinating and mind-blowing. I'll quote my daughter. My older daughter tried on a VR headset, and when she took it off, she said, "Daddy, virtual reality is much better than reality." This is one of those sentences that gets etched into your brain, and like until you go senile, you're gonna remember it. So,
Alex, how old is your daughter?
She's 12. So like my quick download on AR. We haven't invested in any of those companies, but I'm very excited about it. And in terms of the Band-Aids, there's a TechStars company called Sketchfab, which is largest repository of 3D models, and they just released a VR viewer. So suddenly it becomes much more fascinating because you literally can go through British Museum and experience these artifacts, and it's literally a mind-blowing experience. So I think that it's very true that 3D itself is a little, boring in quotes, like, from the consumer perspective, but I think putting that stuff in VR becomes pretty incredible.
We have a company, Parsable, which is AR, selling into the oil well industry. And basically, the AR is used when you need hands-free operation for people fixing machines. So they're able to see the instructions. They're able to see what the next steps should be. But instead of having a tablet or book, and when their hands are getting oily and dirty and they're holding tools, they're able to see it all right in front of them, basically, through the AR. Very effective usage things. And it started out using Google Glass. Now it's using other technologies. But AR has real uses in the industry sector when you need hands-free operation of things and you need to see instructions.
And that makes sense to me when I think about the oil industry, because I would think that they have the deep pockets to finance a tool like that, and it could be very helpful to them. Are tools like that in any time in the near future going to be accessible to consumers in a useful or viable way?
You want to put together your IKEA furniture, and you know, how many of us have done that, right? Wouldn't it be nice to have that AR giving us the instructions and have the vision actually pick out which is that screw that it's telling me that I need to have? You know, yes, I think that is going to be viable for consumers.
Sure. But just to push back on that a second, so I piloted the HoloLens, and I actually fixed a light switch with the help of an electrician with the HoloLens. But I still had to have it connected to this big old computer behind me to use, and the field of vision was like this. Mm-hmm. So it felt like actually it was pretty far from reality.
I mean, it's early. Like we are focused mostly on like B2B applications, but I think, for example, going back to Howard's point and, you know, situational training, right? Like firefighters, nurses, do we believe in like physical training? Do we believe that it's better to kind of like be in the lab and try stuff out versus just read a book? Sure. Now, therefore, once VR and AR achieves its sort of like level comparable with reality, becomes incredibly interesting. To your point, though, I do think it's pretty far out. Like, I wouldn't bet on it going mainstream in the next, like, 3 to 5 years. I mean, 3 to 5 would be probably most bullish that I would get.
Liza, how closely are you paying attention to these trends?
You know, personally, I would love it because it seems like it would replace a husband for anything that you really needed done. So if you could just
totally
sort of,
true,
you know,
right?
I mean, as a person, on a personal level, I would love it. But we haven't really seen anything at the expansion stage in the B2B side. These all sound really early. Some of the things you were mentioning, Howard, would be very interesting to us because they're applications that are used, you know, in the non-consumer in the B2B space. But it does sound a little far off. But I would certainly be a user of it.
Fair enough. I think we all would. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anybody out there? Okay, this is your 2-minute warning to come up with something good while we jump back here. So what happens then to, you know, as we move into a world of 3D images, do all our images become 3D? What happens into 2D images?
I don't think they do. I mean, we've had 3D movies since the 50s, and they've never taken off. We've had 3D stereoscopic images, and except for certain uses, they haven't been that critical. So I kind of am with Bijan on the sort of 3D thing. VR is a very different experience than looking at a 3D image. Back in the 90s, Metacreations bought a company called Real Time Geometry that could take 3D photos of objects, and we were putting 3D pictures on the web so that you could look at what you were going to buy and turn it around and go. And it just never became a very critical thing. People are used to very much seeing things in 2D through catalogs. We've been sort of grown up with that. The 3D need was less than we thought. The 3D movies, Avatar was an amazing success, and then kind of nothing, right? I mean, yeah, there's IMAX 3D things that you see every now and then, but the 3D experience is not, those movies do just as well or better, make more money in the non-3D versions than they do in the 3D versions. And except for some specialized areas like real estate where you want to do walkthroughs, we just haven't seen that.
Got it. And so do you think anything is different now? Do you think we're going to want 3D now? I mean, I take your point that 2D is not going anywhere, but is 3D then really upon us? Because now that I think about it, I totally remember Avatar. Feels like a lifetime ago.
But it's situational, right? Like I think we're framing the question as like 3D versus 2D. I feel like it depends. So example, if you're an engineer and you have a 2D sketch versus if you create like a 3D model, I feel like, you know, you can be more impactful with a 3D model.
Right.
I think that what's been a trend is that notoriously in enterprise and also in consumer, visualizations aren't always like winning. So example, on Wall Street, they still love their Excel, right? And like there's been so many companies trying to go like, hey, I can visually show you the portfolio, and the traders are like, we don't care. Now, why is a totally different question, but I think sort of like, I think it depends on what the application is. So I think in B2B, VR and 3D is already like starting to make impact, certainly in architecture. We have a company called Iris VR that is basically helping you like literally walk through the building before it's even built. So that's helpful. But I think with consumers, to your point, like I think VR is going to be, once it works really well, is going to be the best 3D we've had.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're thinking about visual technology, where does the consumer sense of privacy fit in as you're trying to pilot some of these? I mean, you guys talked about some very cool early stage applications, for example, and they all required me to be pretty comfortable with the fact that I'm being photographed.
Well, I brought up earlier this morning the Enemy of the State movie or Dave Eggers' The Circle. You know, there's pretty dystopian views of what can happen. Even go to London and you're on camera pretty much anywhere you are in London. And so the answer is, it's not that we have to be comfortable with the people who own these images are going to be controllable and use them in good ways. And you know, most people have proven over the last 20 years of the internet they're willing to give up quite a lot of privacy in return for pretty good other values, other things that they get, whether it's social networking, shopping, etc. I don't know how far that'll go.
So you mentioned some dystopian tales that are familiar to me. Can you guys think of any tales that are the opposite, that offer a hopeful view of what the world will be like once we're able to capture it all?
Well, you can see accidents if the image recognition says, "Gee, we just noticed an auto accident in this out of the way place." You can dispatch emergency life saving there minutes before it would have ever been reported. I mean, you can see that in lots of possible areas. You can see it in hospitals where the patient monitoring adds a visual characteristic. So I think you can see a lot of positive things. They're not happening as quickly.
And we don't tend to write science fiction about them?
To me, it's sort of like I'm just horrified at all the false positives. Like, I'm an algorithms guy, I'm a math guy, and like, I find it insanely unhelpful when like things around us are trying to suggest us things and like try to butt in, and I'm like, because they're doing it in such a quirky and like incorrect way. So like, I think, yes, there's going to be incidents when we have algorithms that detect things that's going to save lives. But my question is, how many times this algorithm is going to blow the whistle and be incorrect? So like, I think like we need to give them a chance on one hand. On the other hand, it's like, you know, I don't know if I want every millisecond of my life to be captured and analyzed in catalogs. Like, I kind of want to be human still a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting old. Who knows?
Gordon Bell's gone around with recording his entire life for the last 20 years or so at Microsoft. And of course, you know, there are some issues in some states with the people he's photographing, and particularly if he's recording them, he has to get permission. But the old Greek philosophers talked about the examined life. Well, you know, talk about an examined life. If you're on camera 24/7, it's easy to examine and re-examine that life. I am.
And the flip side of that is, if you're on camera 24/7, it's easy to let go of the habit of actually examining your life because it's always there for you.
True, but look at cameras for police. I mean, the trend now to put cameras on police, and that's certainly impacting the way that they interact with some members of the public, and probably for the better.
But Jessi, also going back to your point, like, I actually think, like, for example, social media is chewing up a ton of our lives, right? And I'm looking at my kids texting, and all, like, we are totally like...
They're not texting, they're Snapchatting.
They're texting. My kids don't have Snapchat yet, but like, they're sending each other text messages, and like, we don't butt in. But I feel like there's a lot of time that goes into it, and I feel like the content, you know, like I don't really look at what they're sending, but I don't anticipate. I see a lot of like emojis flying around. Like I don't think the content is super intellectual. I mean, they read books. They still do a lot. My point is, you know, and then when I write a new blog post, I want to know like how many like people liked my stuff on Twitter, and like the post I wrote like got a ton of likes on LinkedIn. That takes a lot of time. Now, if we're constantly recording ourselves, if everything is captured, do we actually have time to live our lives, and what does it actually mean? Like, I don't know. Maybe that's like too meta, but it's
in
sort
some
of
ways,
like,
Alex, that's the question that these conversations always come back to. And Liza, you looked like you had you'd heard it before.
I mean, my pre-tweens, I guess, spend their entire life on Musical.ly, and they're more concerned about how many likes they get. Privacy means absolutely nothing to them. They want to be broadcast. They want everyone to like them, to put comments. That's so much more important to them than privacy.
And the issue of living your life. I mean, you go to a concert, and how many phones are up in the air, and people, you know, not quite listening to the concert, but showing that they're listening to the concert to the rest of the world, and whether it's and that's a little bit of a frustration, you know, where you really want to experience some things first by yourself and have your own feelings about them, rather than being totally influenced by the crowd around you, particularly by the online crowd.
Well, so there's also a school of thought that would say that actually that is now part of the experience. Snapper didn't happen. It's not that Snapchat is a documentary feature of an experience, but that it is actually a facet of the experience. If I'm an entrepreneur, how do I design into that world? Do I want to be designing in order to help people pull out of it, or do I want to design in order to help them dive into it more?
I think as an entrepreneur, you have to go with the flow, and like you have to go into the future. The question is, it's not inconceivable to think that some of the things we'll do will end up being dumb, right? But like that's okay. We'll self-correct later. Like I'm a deep believer in like power and creativity of humanity, but you know you can't help to wonder, like to Howard's point, if somebody's like Snapchatting half of the concert, they're probably not watching it. That's their choice. As a founder, if you build something that makes this go viral, you'll make a lot of money. So probably go do that.
Well, you could do both, right? I mean, you can make an ad blocker, or you can make an ad, you know, a better ad network tool, and they both will sell. So you can, you have to pick which one you're more passionate about.
Fair enough. Anything from the audience? All right. Right back here. Give us your name and affiliation quickly, and then your question. There's a mic coming to you.
My name is David Blutenthal. I'm the CEO of Snapwave. We're a global community that combines photos and music for more visually engaging music experiences. And since we're talking about music a bit, I'm wondering what you think of this as an investment space for engaging music experiences. And certainly we're here today about imagery with any sort of a visual layer, photos, VR, video, what have you.
So investment space for engaging musical experiences.
Correct. Thank you.
Well, look, I mean, the fact is that from sort of tweens on, every few years there's a new music thing that catches on and becomes very, very important to them. So it's a very ripe investment space, but it's a very fickle one. And so it's a little difficult. At first round, we've mostly avoided them since turntable.fm because, you know, we've seen how fickle it can be. You get 1 million users in year one, and then you're back down to 100,000 in year two. And so it's difficult for us to know which one's going to become the next Snapchat and which one's going to become the next Whisper, you know, or Secret or whatever, you know.
Fair enough. You can't even quite get the name.
Yeah.
Secret or Whisper. Is Whisper even still around, do you guys? Yeah. All right. Another question from the audience. Back here.
Hi, I'm Derek Hoyme, CTO of Reconstruct, and we hear a lot about social media. I was wondering if there are any sectors that you think are heavily underinvested in.
Not social media. I mean, in what sense? I mean, I think you guys are working on mind-blowingly awesome next-gen applications that's going to be like totally life-changing. I think like, you know, vision algorithms, machine learning, AI, all of these things, not just for the sake of algorithm, but when applied to real-life businesses, are going to be completely life-transformative, and already have been, I think. So, like, any one of those areas, I think, is highly interesting, at least to me personally.
Cool. Let's take a question right over here.
Hi, this question for you. You're talking about Retail Next as a company, right, which does analysis of consumer inside a store and then give some actionable things, right? So how do you connect that with increase in revenue? Like, is it just based on some past experience, or like what is the connection? Like, how do you sell these kind of things to large corporates who want to use them?
Well, I mean, they're interested in many facets of the consumer experience, whether or not they had good or bad customer service. Even in terms of merchandising, what was interesting to the consumer, what did they dwell on most, what caught their eye. I mean, those types of things are very difficult to ascertain without seeing the movement around the store. So, I mean, those are the types of things that we've seen that retailers are very interested in.
Yeah, but how do you put a value to that is my question, right? Is there a way to, like, if I were to sell it to a company, right, I would say, okay, how much do you want this for, right? For free, it's great, but for $1 million, like, where do you draw that price point?
I haven't seen their latest ROI model, but I mean, I think from a merchandising perspective, if you have an idea as to what's working versus what's not working, what store layouts work, as opposed to not store layouts that don't work, that's used in terms of uplift of sales.
Okay, and there was a question behind you, right back here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jacob Lowenstein. I run MIT's VR and AR community. I'm curious. It sounds like, especially when it comes to investing in social media, there's a huge advantage if you can predict shifts in societal values. So suddenly people value publicizing themselves, then perhaps suddenly people prefer privacy or sharing only among a niche audience. I'm curious if any of you predict or see an upcoming shift in values that might tip your hat or give you a clue as to where to invest in next.
That's a terrific question. I mean, because what we do see is that every roughly 2 years, the tweens are the predictor, right? They're the ones who do the next thing. And the difference today is that the kids who are becoming tweens today have pretty much been on iPads for 5 years. And so they've been they've had a much different growth experience than even the generation 2 or 3 years before them. And they're sharing differently, and I do think that, but I don't know that I can see what to predict yet. But there's definitely some differences happening. One of them is the importance of music to them. They're not texting anymore, as Jessi said. They're Snapchatting. And they have the time to figure out. New Yorker had a fantastic cartoon last week, which showed a patient in the doctor's chair with his head exploded, and it said, "I was just another 40-year-old trying to learn Snapchat." And they have what you have as a tween is time to explore an app that we as adults in general don't have. And Snapchat has no instructions, pretty much, so you have to explore it to figure out what to do with it. We don't have the time to do that. This new generation will have even more language at their disposal to figure out what these things might do. So they'll explore them faster. So I think we'll see a faster pace.
One thing just to build on that, one thing that I'm very curious about is the visual language that's emerging that this new generation is pioneering, this young generation is pioneering. I'm not fluent in reading it, let alone reading it. But it feels to me like it is that people assume that you can understand the language because that's just harkens back to pictography. And if you could see pictures on the cave wall, then certainly you can make and share images. But as I look at that language in particular emerging on the Snapchat platform, I think that we begin to move toward a world in which there's going to be a nuanced way of writing in images that carries the same nuance that writing in language carried in the last century, and we're going to have to somehow get ahead of the coding on it.
IMHO, why? I mean, we had to get through that battle with the text world, which changed what we were writing, right?
Right.
And learn that language, and it is a new language between the way you're doing things in Snapchat, what things you're putting on people, the emojis you're putting in text, but it's not unlearnable. It's just that kids always want a language that they can keep from their parents, from their elders for a little while.
Fair enough. And I guess in that paradigm, I qualify as the elder?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't want to leave this question though because it's a great question. I want to go back to sort of what cultural shifts you might see just up ahead and where they might come from.
I mean, we don't invest in consumer just because it is so fickle, and we're more interested in more business models that have a longer lasting. But I think it's extremely challenging just having tweens, seeing how they communicate and what they do and what's hot now and not. I mean, it's very even difficult as a parent to make sure that they're being safe to keep up with what they're doing, let alone investing in it. So anyone who does that, hats off.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think the other big cultural shift is the. I don't want to say it's attention span, but the bite size of what they're doing. 50 years ago, I would write letters, right? It would be multiple page letters to people, and certainly in social interactions. What's the longest thing? I wrote a blog post about 8 years ago saying that Gresham's law of blogging was that cheap tweets would take over from the dear blogging. Blogging takes a long time. And so even though Medium's doing reasonably well, so much more is happening in this short form. Yeah. Whether it's 140 characters or 500 characters, it's not 500 words. And that's been a real difference, and that's what this younger generation's, that's one of the biggest differences, is everything has to be said or thought through in something that can be consumed in 1 or 2 minutes.
1 or 2 minutes. Which is exactly how much time I have to sum up all that we have talked about in the last 40. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this conversation. Evan, I'm going to pass back off to you before we take a break.
Applause for the panelists. Thank you, Jessi. Thank you, everybody. This is great.